Thanks for joining me. Hopefully the audio is working all right, and I'll give a few minutes here for this thing to get started. But this is Freedom is Scary, a live video that I try to do at least once a week. I'm John Bryan. I'm a civil rights lawyer here in West Virginia, and I'm interested in a lot of these topics, but I think what's going on right now and what needs to be discussed, like it or not, is what's happening in the presidential election and the absolute chaos that's occurring primarily in two states. I'll give a few more seconds here for people to get on. Is the audio working all right? Looks like my mute button isn't pushed. It's good to see you as well. As I've said before, what is 2020? But it's the year of the Karen. But it's not just the year of the Karen. We now know it's also been the year of the Kraken, which is just a monster of an election debacle that's occurring in this country. And they really go hand in hand because the Karen goes in hand with the Kraken, because it was the mandate tyranny and the hysteria that happened over this country that has enabled the election debacle, which has ultimately occurred. They go together. And I'll put it to you like this. Imagine if Joe Biden had announced, he delivered a primetime speech and said, you know what, because of the times in which we're living, we have this novel coronavirus, and it's just a very dangerous situation, very dangerous times. Imagine if he said that we just can't allow President Trump to continue as president of the United States. It's just too dangerous in these scary and dangerous times. So for your own safety, I did rig the election. We rigged the election. And it was for your safety, though, just to make sure that we got Trump out of there. So imagine if Joe Biden said that. What would our response to that be? Because that's basically what has been happening on a gubernatorial level. Don't worry about what our Constitution says. Don't worry about what the legislatures have done. Don't worry about what our history is and the form of government that our founding fathers set up. Because we're living in novel times and because it's for your own safety, we're going to go ahead and suspend all of that stuff, and we're going to do something different just to make sure that you end up in a safe place. And I sort of stole that idea. I thought it was I hadn't heard it anywhere else. That was really from a piece that Daniel Horowitz had wrote today. And I think it's absolutely correct that election fraud goes hand in hand with governing fraud. They just do. They go hand in hand. And which is worse? And he discusses that he thinks the governing fraud is worse. But they're equally bad, at least. And illegally obtaining a public office by fraud really is no different than using that office to crush civil liberties. It really is the same thing. And the Constitution itself, we're being rushed. And what I'm going to talk about here is whether or not there's even any realistic path to victory at this point for Donald Trump. We always have to look at the ultimate source of law in the United States, and that's the U.S. Constitution. We're being rushed towards these deadlines. We have several deadlines at play. You have the December 8th electoral college vote deadline. You have a December 14th congressional vote, and then you have a January 6th. And then you have a January 20th deadline. Now, the only one of those deadlines that is mentioned in the Constitution that has anything to do directly with the Constitution is the January 20th deadline, at which point President Trump's term ends. That is the constitutional deadline. The other three deadlines are all created by Congress. They're all creatures of federal law, And as we know, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Any statute that Congress passes or passed, whether was in 1948 or whether it was in 1848, those are all going to be subject to the Constitution. So those can be changed, those can be moved. The January 20th deadline cannot be moved, but others have argued, and I don't see any reason to disagree with it, that what we should focus on is, since we do live in novel times, we're presented with a novel situation that we've never faced before with this varying degree of problems in our elections. Really, the only immovable deadline that we have is January 20th, and therefore there's still a lot of time. Now, what is this so-called safe harbor deadline? The safe harbor provision from federal statute, asserts that if a state has established laws governing the appointment of electors and a determination is made according to that law at least 6 days prior to December 14th, then the determination is final on December 8th. So the Supreme Court ruled that the law doesn't actually require states to appoint electors by that date in order for those electoral votes to be counted by Congress when determining the winner of the presidential election. So in the current context that we have, each of our states, because they get to determine the time, place, and manner of the elections, the Constitution doesn't say that these states each have to have a popular vote. Those were the decisions of each individual state, pretty much, to have a popular vote. And it's up to them how to run the time, place, and manner of ascertaining that popular vote. All that's required by the Constitution is that the state has to send its electoral votes to Congress. So however a state wants to determine its popular vote or how its electors are to be chosen, that is going to be a creature of that state law. Here, we very clearly have had problems in several states in ascertaining whether their state law was followed in determining what their popular votes are, and therefore either the results should not be certified, or maybe they should be changed because someone else won. And it really is going to come down to two different states, and that's Georgia and Pennsylvania. And that's why the Trump campaign, or Donald Trump, has filed lawsuits in Pennsylvania and in Georgia. So the point is that constitutional law is supreme. The current electoral deadlines that we have are merely federal statutes. Those are not constitutional law. Those can be changed. One of them, the single day for appointing electors, wasn't established until 1848. Tuesday, why was that picked for this day? And that was based on religious and agricultural reasons, a lot of them that we don't even have anymore, where farmers and citizens lived far away from polling places, and it would take at least a day to travel to a polling place, and lawmakers needed a 2-day window for election day. Sundays were obviously out of bounds, and Wednesday ended up being the prime market day for most farmers during that time. So that is federal election law. That can be changed. That is not in the Constitution. The appointment by electors by statewide popular vote really is a legal custom, not constitutional law either. And that really didn't start until 1860. And the fact is that there is a precedent for moving these dates around. In fact, there was an election that was possibly worse than this one, and that was the 1876 election, where Rutherford B. Hayes defeated the Democrat, was it Samuel Tilden, I believe. And there were all sorts of problems in 1876. But the point is that those dates, they were moved around, and they didn't even figure out who was going to be the president, who was getting the electoral votes, until like 2 days before Rutherford B. Hayes was inaugurated. So in that case, what they did is they basically called a joint session of Congress. They created this electoral commission that actually tabulated what the electoral votes were, and they didn't end up counting those until, see, it was 2 days before he took office. So March 2nd, 1877 is when they determined this, long after the election, and just 2 days before March 4th, 1877, when President Hayes took office. So it's happened before. If there's a problem, the federal law deadlines, there's precedent for moving them around. The only constitutional requirement that there is January 20th. And you know what? That is not a small amount of time to figure out these important issues. Now, looking at these states, they both of the lawsuits in these states and the problems are, what are they? They're separation of powers. They're separation of powers. No, I'm not beating a dead horse. Thanks, Jim, for stopping by. Yours popped out at me. I'm sorry. There's lots of comments, but I tend to notice Jim's because he likes to argue with me. Let's put it nicely. No, we're not beating a dead horse, Jim. And why not? Because we want to follow the Constitution, right? You probably were fine with spending the last 4 years and trying to overturn the 2016 results. And I'm sure you're absolutely convinced that Vladimir Putin had a hand in putting President Trump in office in 2016, even though there's no evidence for that whatsoever. And all of a sudden now, because it's in your interest, you're in a rush to declare who the president-elect is before we find out what happened. And, here, I'm going to prove to you, Jim, that you're acting much like a tyrant would act. In fact, even the European Union would declare that you are advocating for poor election standards that they really wouldn't allow even in the European Union. And if you don't believe me, I'll prove it to you. Let's see. Before I get to these specific states, let me look at this pretty interesting document that I found. Where is it? All right, the Handbook for European Union Election Observation. I haven't seen this anywhere else. I just happened to come across it. Let me see if I can share the screen here to bring it up. All right, there it is. Oops, let's try the other one. Nope. All right, it's close enough. All right, so see this. This is the European Union Handbook on elections. This is how they teach these election observers, who even will go into third world countries and whatnot, what to look for as far as voting fraud and when elections are fair, when they're not fair. So this is really amazing. You can read the European Union, and they created this well ahead of the 2020 election. I don't know exactly when it was started, but I'm going to read some of this to you. Let's see. Let's look at, I'll put a link to this at the website, thecivilrightslawyer.com. It's a pretty huge document. All right, you look at page 82. I looked at this before. All right, this is pertinent to our interest. The closing of polling and counting of votes, because that's come up now, hasn't it, in Georgia? All right, so take a look at this. Again, this is from the European Union. And for instance, this is when they send election observers to places like Guinea-Bissau. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but they're going all over the world and observing these elections. Maybe they even send them to America. And if they had sent them to Georgia from the European Union, they would have had a lot of problems to account for. Take a look at this. Let's see. All right. Counting officials will need to record data using standard documentation. I'm looking right about here, which is often referred to as the results protocol. All right, here's where it is. All stages of the closing and counting process should take place in the presence and full view, typo there, of the party/candidate representatives, as well as international and domestic observers if they are present. Counting should not take place in an atmosphere of intimidation. So we know that in many different polling places, usually in urban areas in this country, that Republican poll watchers were not allowed to observe. In fact, curtains were put up so that they couldn't even see if they wanted to. And then let's continue. The time for closing the polls should be fixed. Any decision to extend voting hours should be based on objective criteria, which are applied in a consistent manner. All persons who are waiting at the line to close the polls should be allowed to cast their ballot. Procedures for closing should include immediately sealing of the ballot box and securing the unused ballot papers. Okay, skipping down a few. Let's see. Here we go. The counting of the votes should take place promptly after the closing of the poll in order to minimize opportunities for interference with the ballots. All right, it gets even better and better. All right. The counting of ballot papers at the polling stations can have the benefit of enhancing transparency and accountability. However, a counting center can create a more controlled environment for counting. All right, here we go. If the ballot is for the counting center, it is crucial that it is supervised and accounted for at every stage. Or candidate representatives and observers should be permitted to accompany the ballot box while in transit. All right, look at this. As they are counted, and again, this is meant for third world countries. And you'll see the point is here that we're not even following these guidelines in the United States. And Democrats, people like Jim, are acting like it's completely normal. But it's not even up to European Union standards for their poll watchers they're sending to third world countries. As they are counted, ballot papers should be available for inspection by those present. That's interesting. Were those best practices used in the American elections? No. All ballots that indicate the intended choice of the voter should be considered as valid. They contain no marks that indicate who cast the ballot. All right. Where there are discrepancies, the result is close, or the number of invalid votes is significant, an immediate recount may be required. Okay. As soon as the counting is completed, they need to provide an opportunity for results to be fully inspected. And look at this. There should be opportunities to seek a remedy in the event of objections against decisions or activities of the counting staff. Look at that. Are those rights that Jim would give to Donald Trump? No. And look, they even have a chart. They even have a chart if you understand and learn better through charts. So best practices, or look, in their words, genuine elections. Do we have a genuine election? Well, were the votes counted in the presence of candidates or their agents? No. Let's see, was there independent scrutiny of the counting process so that electors have confidence in the security of the ballot and the counting of the votes? No. But if you want to see how the European Union teaches some of these third world countries when they're having elections that we don't follow in the United States, here is some advice to Democrats like Jim. Candidate and party agents and observers are able to observe all stages of the counting process. Was that best practice in the United States? No. All right. And it just gets better. There's more. There's more. If the European Union sent some of the same people they send to the third world countries, they They wouldn't even neither would they call Joe Biden president-elect. In fact, they'd be calling for maybe UN intervention and unfair election and results in the American election system. Now look at this, page 84 of EU's handbook, electronic voting. Now here's where we get into some of what's happened in Georgia and elsewhere with the Dominion machines. All right, they note that electronic voting is becoming established in many countries. So that's exactly what is happening with one of these Dominion machines. Anything other than paper ballots. This is not voting over the internet. These are the paper ballots that kind of like we use everywhere here in the United States. So they note that the use of e-voting may raise serious concerns over the transparency of the voting process and the accountability of election officials. Of course, those are not things that we have to worry about in the United States. In addition, e-voting can raise concerns as to whether an individual's vote can even be traced. What else? E-voting systems linked to the internet or other computer networks may be susceptible to hacking or outside manipulation. Again, not something that we have to worry about in the United States. You know, we're far past that. And this is funny. As such, e-voting is most appropriate in countries with very high levels of public confidence in the integrity of the voting, counting, and tabulation process. So if you're in a country where the public confidence in the electoral process is low, you don't want to choose e-voting because it may further diminish that trust. So, you know, note to self, we may not want to use e-voting in the future after this election. All right. So then they go through, they go, you know, you don't hear any of this from Democrats. You don't hear any of this from Jim that, you know, there's no issues with voting, e-voting. There's no issues with, of course not. Well, here's the here's the European Union saying the exact opposite. You have to be very careful with electronic voting. All right, here's another thing they bring up, and I'll get to their chart. This chart, the use of e-voting equipment, including software operating under confidentiality agreements, may reduce the transparency of the electoral process. Excuse me. And potentially limit the opportunities for independent observation by party candidate agents and observers. All right, observation of e-voting can be challenging, and as it requires expertise and it's less accessible to scrutiny. Okay. All right, so here's the chart. What are the best practices? All right, so the means of e-voting should not prevent observation of the process by candidate, agents, or observers. Now, isn't that a common theme you see running through the EU's election observer program, that a main central tenet of it seems to be, in order to have a fair election, both sides have to be able to participate and observe the counting process, whether it's e-voting or whether it's paper tab voting. So there should be checks against the integrity of the system. So if we even question it here, then we are acting like conspiracy theorists. So let me see if I can find this is such a big document. Let me see if I can find the name of this so you can look it up. All right, let me share it one more time here. This is, you'll like the cover. This is the Handbook for European Union Election Observation. There it is. So that's the cover of it. It's the second edition, and you can see some of the places they're going to with these elections. In fact, you know, if your election in your third world country, or your Middle Eastern country, or your Far East country, or South America, wherever they're going for these, or Africa, if your third world country has EU poll watchers, election observers, the chances are that your election was less fraudulent than the American election because a central theme in it is that both sides, both parties, all parties should get to fully observe. And that's not something that was happening. In fact, that was a central part of Donald Trump's lawsuits in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and elsewhere, that both sides were not treated with the same ability to observe what was going on. So there, Jim, I just wanted to make the point to you that you mock me and anyone else who dares to even look at the integrity of the election results. And I'll note another thing. If you go on looking at the EU standards, they get into tabulation and publication of results in the post-election environment. It actually says this: candidates and political parties have the right to challenge the validity of election results. Now, not in the United States. Jim would not allow that in the United States. I mean, you have to take the results as you're given by the news media. There's no right to challenge election results in the United States. That's what they would have you believe. Now, even third world countries are getting the right, or being taught anyways, when they learn to have free elections, that candidates and political parties have the right to challenge the validity of election results, and that procedures should be established to allow challenges to be within an appropriate time frame to an independent body such as a court. Challenges should be dealt with impartially, and decisions should be based on the available evidence and made without political consideration. So that's not U.S. law. That is the guidebook from the European Union. And I just happened upon that. But isn't that crazy that everything that we're complaining about in the United States, from the lack of having poll observers to the e-voting machines, it's all warned about by the EU in this handbook. And then the result of it is that in order to have integrity in the election process or the results, there has to be the capability of challenging in some neutral body such as a court. And again, they say such as a court because this is for observers and going into third world countries to see whether or not this election is completely rigged or whether it's a legitimate election. And we're violating most of these in these places like Georgia or Detroit or Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. We're not even rising to those bare best practices that they're trying to get third world countries to institute. So what happened in Georgia? Just like Pennsylvania, really, at the core, you have a violation of separation of powers. Now, again, it's the states that get to decide the time, place, and manner of these elections. And how do states decide? That's through their elected representatives. That's through their legislature. And that's who's supposed to make law. Now, you'll see that in the lead up of all this mandate tyranny, that Fulton County, Georgia officials illegally accepted more than $6 million in private grants that imposed conditions on the conduct of these elections without any authority from the state legislature of Georgia, and entered into a settlement agreement with the Democrat Party in Georgia that created new rules for processing absentee ballots that directly went against what the legislature's intent was as far as how the time, place, and manner of these elections are to be conducted in Georgia. At the core is a violation of separation of powers. Can Democrat Party officials suing or working with executive branch officials in that state change the time, place, and manner when our Constitution allows Georgia's legislature to do it, and Georgia's Constitution provides that its legislature is the body that gets to make the time, place, and manner of how they're going to compute their electoral votes for presidential elections. And that's the same thing for every state. Is the legislative process was not followed before changing the rules, which has been a common theme in 2020, and not just that state, but many different states. Now in Georgia also, executive branch officials also failed to enforce state law in Georgia, such as residency requirements on voters, and who were able to change addresses before the November 3rd, 2020 election, leading to an estimated 20,000 unlawful ballots improperly counted just for that. Now, where is this coming from? This is from the Trump campaign's lawsuit in Georgia. And like the European Union warns, you have to give the opportunity for a candidate or a campaign to challenge before a neutral, hopefully unbiased body, the election results. So if, according to Trump's lawsuit, what are the numbers? The data experts cited in his lawsuit put the vote disparity at more than 20,000 greater for Joe Biden than for Donald Trump, which would be enough to change the results, even without having the election results decertified in Georgia. It would be enough, just the 200,000, to flip Georgia to Trump. Now, also in Georgia, what about the video that we saw of the poll workers after the poll closed, pulling the ballots out of the box and moving things around? So somewhere here I have all right, here it is. That's basically a picture of the Georgia Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing where they were reviewing that video footage of, and I'm sure we've all seen it by now. So a lot of the mainstream news media outlets have been saying that video has now been debunked. Well, has it been debunked? There was a good article in the Federalist newspaper, the Federalist website today by Molly Hemingway that specifically blew all of this out of the water, that no, the Georgia video has not been debunked at all. So it was one fact check group called Lead Stories, which is, if you track the money trail from them, it is funded by a bunch of left-wing groups. So the Lead Story says they put out a hoax alert, falsely claiming to have debunked the security video, and then Washington Post, Newsweek, etc., followed along, criticizing anyone who discussed it for giving this video any traction. So their quote fact check said that government officials told them that everything was fine with the counting and that the ballots were in containers, not suitcases, and that the party observers were never told to leave because counting was over for the night. Now, was that true? Was that true? And was that a real fact check? So the question were Republican poll watchers, break it down. Number one, were Republican poll watchers and the media told that counting had stopped for the night? Well, Georgia Republican Party chairman, where is it? All right. Georgia Republican Party chairman David Schaefer has consistently said that that's what happened at State Farm Arena, beginning the hours after the election. Fulton County told our observers last night to go home because they were closing up, and then continued to count ballots in secret. Well, that was absolutely true. So how was that debunked? The fact is that claim, which has been repeated consistently, is backed by sworn affidavits from two Republican observers who alleged that they were kept an unreasonable distance from the ballots even while they were at the State Farm Arena, which made it therefore completely impossible to meaningfully observe what was going on. Again, as the EU tries to make sure it happens even in third world countries, that wasn't allowed to happen at the State Farm Arena. Lead Stories also said, where was it? There was never, this is their quote, there was never an announcement made to the media and other observers about the counting being over for the night and them needing to leave. And who, excuse me, and was provided information by the media liaison who was present. Now, let's see. On election night, ABC News reported that the ballot counters were sent home at that night at the time that the Republicans said that everyone was sent home and the counting was stopped. And I have that screenshot here as well. So there it is, right from the mainstream news, from ABC News Politics. The election department sent the ballot counters out at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta home at 10:30 p.m. So the fact checkers must have missed what the Republican Party chairman has said in Georgia, and they also missed what ABC News reported. So the Republican poll watchers' story, backed by their affidavit, matches the evidence. Really, it matches what the Republican Party of Georgia has said, and it matches what the mainstream media was reporting on that night. And the fact is they're just obfuscating. They didn't fact check at all. In fact, Fulton County had such massive problems. They had such massive problems in the past at managing these elections that they were fined in the past and forced into this settlement agreement. It was the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that reported on the procedures that were put in place in Fulton County because of all the problems they'd had in the past. So to avoid fines, they had to maintain verifiable levels of operational competence, and they were incompetent. Keeping a force of 2,200 properly trained poll workers, providing at least 24 early voting sites, and requiring them to regularly update the board on the pool of poll workers. And they actually brought in this guy, Carter Jones, to be an independent elections monitor there in Fulton County, who had spent time in Africa helping countries improve their elections. And possibly he was using the European Union handbook on what the best practices are to have a free and fair election. So let's see. Then that brings us to, so the Georgia video, it has not been debunked. It has not been debunked. And that is going to be one component of the litigation. That's an item of evidence, but there's a lot more than that from Georgia. And then I'll get to what the president's legal counsel has made in their lawsuit, what their legal arguments are. I also saw this news that came out today that Ware County, Georgia, that supposedly they had tested the Dominion tabulators and they had figured out that it yielded 26% more Biden votes than Trump votes. And I tried to track down, where that was coming from or verify it. And I think it was coming from, let's see, do I have it here? I don't have it here, but that was coming from this guy, Rob Hurst, who he had claimed on Twitter. To make a long story short, apparently Ware County had come out and they had sort of debunked this, that, there was no independent testing of a machine out of Ware County. So, might pay attention to that to see if anything else comes out of that. And it might be happening now. But the more important thing is, well, what are Trump's and really the Georgia Republicans Party, what are their bigger claims in this lawsuit? And it comes down to this, that they filed this lawsuit, this verified petition to contest the election in Georgia. And they allege in here that 2,560 felons voted in Georgia, that there were 66,247 underage people registered to vote. And again, these are all people who, if they voted, then there should be no dispute that those votes should not count. But right now, as it stands, according to the lawsuit, they have been counted unlawfully or illegally, as many of you would prefer. 4,926 voters were registered in another state after they registered in Georgia, which under Georgia law would make them ineligible. That there were 395 people who cast votes in another state for the same election, which is obviously illegal. We don't allow one person to vote both in Georgia and in some other state in one presidential election. 15,700 voters had filed national change of address forms without re-registering to vote. 40,279 people had moved counties within Georgia without re-registering. 1,043 people had claimed physical impossibility of a P.O. box as their address. 98 people who registered after the deadline, and among others, were counted. 10,315 people who were deceased on election day, 8,718 of whom had been registered as dead before their votes were accepted, but their votes were counted. So if all of these allegations are true, then those votes should not be counted in the final tabulation. And therefore, Georgia should take some sort of legal action in response to that, either change the votes, refuse to certify what they've already counted, or maybe hold a new election. So what does the lawsuit in Georgia seek? Well, I took a look at it and I put it up on the website, and you can read it for yourself at civilrightslawyer.com. Maybe I can get to that here. I try to bring it up on the screen. Oops. Let me hide that. All right, so here's the website, Constitutional Mayhem. This is one way you can watch this live cast. And so I went ahead and put up so you can see for yourself here. You don't take my word for it. Both of the lawsuits that are really at the center of what's going to happen here. You have the Georgia lawsuit, and that's originally filed in Fulton County. See that? A lot of parties. But this is the lawsuit that was filed on behalf of President Trump. And you can, if you go all the ways in these lawsuits, go down to the very bottom, and this is 64 pages long. So it's very detailed. Get to the bottom, you see who the lawyers were who filed it. And this is the prayer for relief that says what they're asking for. So what are they asking for? A declaratory judgment that systematic material violations of the election code occurred, violated their due process rights under the Georgia Constitution, and rendered the election null and void as a matter of law. So they're asking that the election results in Georgia be rendered null and void, and that the court issue an injunction requiring these state officials to certify the results of the contested election. And as I've discussed before, what happens if there's a decertification in either Georgia or Pennsylvania, that will bring Joe Biden's amount of actually certified electoral votes that end up at Congress below 270. If they get below 270, then it being the election, will go to the House of Representatives to decide how to apportion the electoral votes. And based on the current makeup of that, then that will be a Trump victory. So there are two ways to win in either one of these states. Either show that there's enough fraud that the vote numbers need to be changed to make Donald Trump the winner of the electoral votes in that particular state, either of those states, or to get the election results decertified in either of those states, which would drop Biden down below what he needs to avoid the election going into the House of Representatives. So the other thing I wanted to point out was, I mean, a lot of times when you file lawsuits, you'll ask for one thing and then you'll ask for several things in the alternative. Here, you can see that his lawyers had put in here. Alternatively, there's a couple requests in the alternative. Let's see. One of the alternatives is that they have a new election. Let's see. So they basically ask for anything and everything. So, let's see. All right. Alternatively, the court issue an injunction prohibiting Secretary of State from appointing the slate of presidential electors due to the systematic irregularities of the contested election sufficient to cast doubt on its outcome. Or they say in here somewhere, or that, you know, we'll take another election that's held in accordance with the election code. And when they put election code in here, they're saying the Georgia election laws as has been established by the Georgia legislature. So this election was not following that election code. It was following all sorts of other things that were worked out between the executive branch, which is not under the legislature, and the Democrat Party, and could be other groups. All right. So that is the lawsuit in Georgia. And again, if you go to the website, civilrightslawyer.com, you can read exactly all 64 pages of this to show exactly what the allegations are. And you won't hear it in the news media. But as the EU states in their handbook, that any free election in a free country has to have the ability to challenge election results in court. You just do. And that's all Trump is doing. But people like Jim don't want it to happen. They don't want any judicial review of the election results. And why is that? Well, probably for the same reason that I'm sure Jim also does not want voter ID. Why would people like Jim or some of these election officials in some of these Democrat-ruled cities or counties, why do they not want people to have to show an ID to vote? Is it because they want to ensure the integrity of the voting system? Or is it because they think that they're going to get some benefit from fraudulent voting? So who are they expecting, if an illegal alien votes, who are they expecting that vote to go for? So it's probably the party that has been advocating for an open border, probably, just a guess, that they're hoping to get some illegal votes. It's been those people who have been trying to lower the security in some of these cities and some of these states to increase the likelihood of fraud. Now, why? So something like this could happen. And this has been years in the making. All right, so in Michigan, and I really wasn't going to talk about Michigan, but there was just some news today that there was a federal judge who ruled in Michigan, and it wasn't a Trump campaign lawsuit, but that there was going to be a forensic audit of Dominion voting machines in Antrim County, Michigan. And that was just something I saw in the news today, that a federal judge has ordered a forensic inspection of Dominion voting machines in Antrim County, Michigan, where 6,000 votes had been incorrectly flipped from President Trump to Democrat nominee Joe Biden in the early tabulation of votes before being corrected. Now, it wasn't a lawsuit filed by Trump. In fact, it was filed by this guy named William Bailey, who was a local resident there, who was challenging the results of a proposal to allow a marijuana retailer in the town that he lived in, and that the proposal had initially failed. And that's the context in which this came up. But apparently, the Jenna Ellis, one of the lawyers for Trump, had announced that a judge had granted their team access to 22 of the Dominion voting machines that happened in this case, and that they were going to actually conduct this forensic audit. Now, whether or not that's the case, I'm not sure. Now, Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani also had retweeted this or tweeted this, and he called this ruling in Michigan a big win on Twitter. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. Now, Pennsylvania. Also, I have the whole lawsuit in Pennsylvania up there on the website. I can encourage you to read it yourself. So the urban counties, again, this is another violation of separation of powers, where you have the time, place, and manner of these elections supposed to have been decided by the legislature in Pennsylvania, but it's happened in all sorts of different ways during 2020 year of the Karen. So you have urban counties such as Allegheny County, which is Pittsburgh. You have Philadelphia, Delaware County. They all received over $10 million in private grants that imposed strict conditions on the conduct of these elections without any legislative approval whatsoever, violating the state laws that they already had, and prohibited really the use of private money to pay for federal elections. Also, election officials there and these areas in Pennsylvania took unlawful steps, according to the allegations, to pre-canvass mail-in ballots and help voters quote, cure flawed ballots that had missing or incorrect information or otherwise failed to meet the legal criteria designed to prevent fraud. So they've alleged that the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania also exceeded her authority by granting permission for counties to engage in these unlawful practices. So the Trump campaign filed a lawsuit. Again, you can read it. And it was in state court in Pennsylvania, and the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania ultimately denied it at the urging of the executive branch officials in Pennsylvania. And the grounds that they denied it on was basically they waited too long to file it, according to the allegations. So that now is being appealed to the United States Supreme Court. And an interesting update in that is that Justice Alito, who is, of course, one of the 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices, he moved up the deadline in this case. So he asked officials in Pennsylvania, who would be the opponents of the Trump campaign in this litigation, to file their briefs by Tuesday at 9 a.m. So this is a challenge to, just like in Georgia, to attempt to overturn the election results in Pennsylvania. And this is where this safe harbor deadline comes in. So Tuesday is also the safe harbor deadline that requires controversies surrounding elections to be ended so that states can choose their electors before December 14th, the meeting of the Electoral College. So Alito initially had called for response arguments by Wednesday, December 9th, but presumably because of this safe harbor deadline, he moved it up. And that's an interesting sign, hopefully a good sign. But it definitely is a signal that Pennsylvania is still in play, just as Florida was in the year 2000, and it took 37 days to clear up. So it could, let's see, and the December 8th deadline could be a signal that the Supreme Court is going to take up the case and potentially overturn it. Let's see. Now, a lot of the websites that you'll see these legal scholars talking about how that case has no chance before the Supreme Court. But why not? When you look at it, and I'll note that also, I think it was Alan Dershowitz, one of the most well-known constitutional scholars, has said, I believe it was yesterday, that he thinks that there's a chance that the Supreme Court could overturn that ruling. So I don't know that anyone knows. Nobody knows what's going to happen, because at some point you have to get to the issue of, are we going to allow this? And it's going to be up to the Supreme Court, if anybody, to decide whether or not, given everything that's happened in 2020, whether the Democrat Party machines, the political machines, or the governors, the executive branches, the voting, quote, officials in these states, whether it was constitutional for them to change the safeguards that the legislature had already enacted for voting. What's legal, what's not. Could they suspend or change those laws without going to the legislature? It's the same sort of issue that I've been harping on over and over in regard to the coronavirus mandate tyranny. If you want to have a mask law, go to the legislature. Go to the legislature, because the governor is not allowed to make laws under our state constitution. It's the same thing in most of these states, or all these states. And was it okay to change or suspend these election laws without going to the legislature first? So it might be the case that the Supreme Court says, well, you know what? Coronavirus was a novel new thing. Nobody quite knew what to do, and it was very dangerous. These are all the people that have died. And because there was this great danger, and the executive branches, the governors have these emergency powers that, we're going to allow it because the government has this interest in keeping people safe. And that would be the wrong decision, because it's saying, it's just like Horowitz's example of Biden coming out and saying that, yeah, I cheated, we rigged the election, but we had to do it to get rid of Trump because we were just in a very unsafe position. So, if Trump had stayed in office, we could calculate that however many millions of people would have died as a result. So it's the same thing. If you allow the constitutional rules to be bent in any way, then you allow anyone to do it for any reason that they subjectively want to do it. So you either follow the process in every case, even where you think it's dangerous, or you don't follow it at all. Now, Ted Cruz has actually gotten involved in this Pennsylvania case, and he is apparently going to argue the thing if it goes to the Supreme Court for argument. And this is a post that Ted Cruz had made on Twitter, and he was talking about it on Fox News, as you can see there. But he said, if the Supreme Court grants certiorari in the Pennsylvania election case, I've told the petitioners I will stand ready to present the oral arguments. And he said, because of the importance of the legal issues presented, and I'll also note that Ted Cruz, the reason why he would argue that, or why we care what he has to say about it, is because he has been he clerked at the Supreme Court. So he knows a little bit about it, and he is a great constitutional scholar. But he said that he supports the case, and it was brought by Congressman Mike Kelly. But he said the legal team had asked him if he'd be willing to argue it, and if it's granted by the court, he's agreed, and he said he'll stand ready to present the oral argument. So he said, the bitter division and acrimony we see across the nation needs resolution. I believe the Supreme Court of the United States has a responsibility to the American people to ensure within its power that we're following the law and following the Constitution. So it should be pretty interesting. So that's what's going on. There's more happening in other states. And one good source for this I found is if you go to realclearpolitics.com, they've actually been compiling all the fraud allegations in every state. So you can that can help you keep a track on where the fraud allegations are occurring and where they're not. But the two most important spots, I think, and the two realistic paths to victory for the Trump campaign are Georgia and Pennsylvania. And that's why, and really I've predicted that, and I know very, very little about probably federal election law compared to other things, but I did predict this from the beginning, that the path to victory for Trump was going to be, and my guess was decertifying or causing the elections, the electoral votes in either Pennsylvania or Georgia to be decertified. Now I was concentrating on Pennsylvania. And I'm proven right by these lawsuits. If you look at the prayer, the relief for prayer at the end of the lawsuits, that's exactly what they're asking for. It's there in black and white. They're asking the courts in that state or wherever the appeal ends up, such as the Supreme Court, to decertify those election results. And that's exactly what would happen is if they're decertified, Biden falls below 270, it goes to the House of Representatives. And unlike in 1876. Now, that's not exactly what happened in 1876, but you had a completely divided, I think it was a divided House then. But here, with the makeup of the Republican versus Democrat House of Representatives members, it would be really Trump victory as a matter of law if that happens. And remember, when we look at following the federal Constitution, it does not require that the victor of the presidential election has to have won the popular vote in any respective states. It doesn't require that at all. All it does is say that the states are to decide amongst themselves how they want to come up with their electoral votes. It's up to them to decide that. So that's the state law of any state. That's the state law of Georgia and the state law of Pennsylvania. That's not federal law. The only federal law there are these deadlines that we talked about. But out of the four deadlines, there's only one that can't be moved, and that's January 20th. That's the only one that's in the Constitution. That's when President Trump's term ends, and whoever is the winner, that's when their term begins. So in 1876, they didn't even decide how to calculate the electoral votes until 2 days before that date. So there's still time. The safe harbor date, the other dates, those could all be moved. I mean, those are federal law. Those are subservient to constitutional law. There's no requirement in the U.S. Constitution that Trump has to have won a popular victory in either Georgia or Pennsylvania to be able to be awarded the electoral votes from Georgia or Pennsylvania. That will be a creature of Georgia law and of Pennsylvania law. And so when this Pennsylvania case goes up to the Supreme Court, they will be applying Georgia law. Was it constitutional under the Georgia Constitution for these election laws to be suspended or changed in some way or relaxed the way it happened, which according to the allegations caused all these fraudulent votes and caused Joe Biden to win. So we'll see what happens there, but it certainly is. I mean, it certainly is. It still is a legitimate path to victory because there is. It's not just evidence of fraud. While there is evidence of fraud, for instance, I read you the calculations in Georgia that it could flip as many as 200,000 votes, even just not counting the allegedly illegal votes. But also, we could just have a complete decertification. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know. But theoretically, it can happen. I mean, it can happen. If that happens, then it goes to the House of Representatives. So there's definitely a path for that to happen. All right. So let's see. Lots and lots and lots of questions here, comments. All right. Mail-out ballots are clearly inferior to absentee. Squint Fox, that's absolutely correct. And why is that? So that's a common argument is, well, we've always had absentee ballots, for instance, for the military. You don't want their votes to count. Well, there's a big difference in somebody requesting a ballot for some legitimate reason, such as they're in the military or they're out of state at the time, or they're off getting medical treatment somewhere. That's a lot different than just mailing them out to people. And why? Because it increases. I mean, there's always a risk of fraud with absentee ballots, but it's a minimal risk compared. You don't really want any mail-in voting. There shouldn't be any, maybe with the exception of the military. And that could be done without probably absentee ballots as well. But just the mail out, I mean, why have Democrats been pushing for this? Because they can proactively harvest the ballots. They can take people who didn't request ballots, get allegedly their signature on it, and now you've got all these Democrat votes that you didn't have before. Now, is the reason because they just weren't willing to vote because it wasn't convenient enough for them? Or is the reason because they are dead or it's completely fraudulent? Let's see. Squint, that's a good question. How often has it gone to Congress to decide? Well, the first really screwball, really bad chaos election we had was the reason we have the electoral process that we have, and that is the election of 1800. That was there were all sorts of issues where we saw that there needed to be an amendment to the Constitution, that the way that we were doing it, the way we had anticipated it would work, wasn't working quite right. So it might be that was the only time it had come up. It may have happened again. I'm not sure, but I did look into the election of 1876, and that is an interesting one. And that's when Rutherford B. Hayes was first elected. And there was a lot of the similar chaos that happened. Now, it wasn't that Congress decided in 1876. It was what they did was they created an election commission to figure out what in the heck was going on, because some of the states, this was right after the Civil War, were sending two sets of electoral votes. So it was really screwy, and they had to figure out what the votes, how to count the votes, really. So that's just in counting and tabulating the votes. That wasn't actually Congress deciding who would get it. And there was at least one time that had happened before. I'm sure somebody will come up with it. Not in recent times. Let's see, Joshua Watson, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Let's see, when the swamp drains it, hope they don't come to our beautiful South Carolina. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's a lawyer and a new legislator here in West Virginia, and he was just talking to me about South Carolina. He had just gone there. Now, I don't really like South Carolina that much. No offense, because all I do in South Carolina is drive through on the way and back from Florida on I-26, and it's just all pine trees and it's hot. You might as well just go a little further to Florida, where there's also pine trees and it's also hot, but it also doesn't get that cold, because in South Carolina it still gets pretty cold. All right, I'm just messing with you, obviously. Jim, I appreciate you. You haven't lost interest here. How many here take Prozac and other psych medications? Unfortunately, I can't answer that for you, but I do know that when you start leveling the ad hominem attacks instead of actually debating the issues, that you've basically admitted that you don't have anything else better to say. And that's why people like you always say Orange Man bad or Drumpf. And they just call names instead of actually criticizing policies. So yeah, there are people that want to follow the Constitution, and they want to make sure that their constitutional rights, which the right to vote is a fundamental constitutional right, is not disenfranchised. And that's not something that is a conspiracy theory, and it's not something that makes you crazy from wanting your vote to count and wanting illegal votes or votes of dead people to not count. Barbie, doesn't the Constitution trump federal law? Yes. And that was a point I was trying to make, is that the safe harbor deadline that people are being rushed to make is federal law. It's a federal statute. It's not required in the Constitution. It's been moved before. It can be moved again if really need be. Now, if we had this tremendous need to suspend and change voting laws to deal with the coronavirus, then it's just another part of this crazy year in this election that we may need to wait until 2 days before the inauguration of the new president on January 20th before we really decide how the electoral votes are to be calculated. It's a constitutional republic, not a democracy. That's correct. And what is important in a constitutional republic is the idea of separation of powers and checks and balances. And that's what's been completely thrown out the window in 2020 on the state level, more so than the federal level, is the lack of any checks and balances. Not even the judicial branches are reviewing the executive branch's unchecked power. And the legislative branches, for the most part, haven't been doing it either, including in West Virginia. At least 2 sheriff's departments in California refused to back up their governor's mandates. I've seen that, and it would be nice. And somebody else had sent me a link to a county in Virginia who had actually passed a county resolution, or whatever you would call it, announcing pretty much the same thing, that they weren't going to enforce, Governor Northam's mandates or some of his mandates. And that would be a great thing to see in West Virginia, but we didn't really see in West Virginia some of these sheriffs stepping up and, during some of the gun control debates, when we were looking at enacting constitutional carry, for instance, in West Virginia, or campus carry. You saw a lot of the sheriffs coming out against having, against the Second Amendment, against gun rights. didn't want students who had a concealed weapon permit, once they travel onto WVU property, to be able to be armed. Or they didn't want somebody to have a concealed pistol without having been granted a permission from the government first. So a lot of the sheriffs in West Virginia have proven to have been really more focused on how to be more effective law enforcement agencies, rather than actually being this idyllic protector of constitutional liberties that sometimes you have in Virginia, even though they've got this awful governor and they have to contend with the Northern Virginia population giving a Democrat legislature in that state. They, at least in these rural areas that are bordering us, have some of these sheriffs that understand that it's their job, if they're going to take an oath to uphold the Constitution, to take some sort of action to stop the governor or even the state legislature from infringing on their what they perceive as unconstitutional infringements. And I'd like to see some of that with this mandate tyranny in West Virginia, is some of these sheriffs, instead of saying, all right, yes, sir, governor, we're going to start arresting people, of saying, you know what, we're not going to do that. And I know a lot of individual police officers, including, a couple deputies that I know in different counties, did express to me personally that they weren't going to follow the governor's mandates to arrest people, et cetera. But, as the sheriffs themselves doing that, I wouldn't hold your breath. Roger Frame, Jim Fink, he's losing the argument, so he's running a Z pattern. Yep, make a rabbit proud. Well, he's probably somewhere there down below, talking about Orange Man bad. Let's see, Bible Prophecy News. Today, the judge in Georgia, the judge said it's not a federal issue, it's a state issue. Yeah, just like the mandate tyranny, it's the state constitution. And if the legislature hasn't passed the law, and it's a law, then it's unconstitutional under the state constitution, because it places the ability to enact laws on the legislature. And yeah, I've tried to bring up that issue in federal court. The federal judges don't want to handle it. It's a state issue. Now, the exception to that is the Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court does have jurisdiction to hear state law appeals from the state Supreme Court, such as the Pennsylvania Supreme Court or even the West Virginia Supreme Court. So if you can get to the Supreme Court, they are allowed to and will review those state law issues. My Dog Rex, new law, all ballots will be hand counted in a central location by the people who are seeking office and their name is on the ballot. I think the whole ironic thing here, when I found that European Union handbook, that's been used in all these third world countries, I knew that when I read through that, I knew that there would be just certain ironies in there about oversight of these elections that Democrats are defending right now, that they don't even allow happen in these third world countries. I think we do need to look at going to all of our state legislatures and reviewing and changing these voting laws to, maybe we do need to get ink on our finger to prove that we've already voted, or at least have some sort of ID to vote, which we do have here in West Virginia, but in a lot of states that they don't have. And why not? I mean, look what you get put through to just have a driver's license to go to the DMV. And we get told continuously that there is no constitutional right at all to drive, that it's just a privilege. But it is a fundamental constitutional right to vote. All right. Ted Cruz is stupider than Trump, if that's possible. Well, Terry, what would you base that on? I mean, he's a sitting U.S. senator, one of the better well-known ones. I mean, he was the last contender for the presidency against Trump. which is saying something because he beat out a lot of people. He was a law clerk for a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And if you knew anything about the Supreme Court, you'd know that that is a pure meritocracy as far as getting on as a law clerk. It's extremely, extremely difficult. Nothing but the top of a law school class from a respectable law school can even have any chance of getting there. And there are no free grades in law school, by the way. The law school is graded. There may be affirmative action to get into law school, but once you're there, you're graded on a perfect bell curve. So it's like blind grading. It's like a bell. You got a few people that do really well, and then most of the people are like getting C's, and then you come down the other side where a few people fail. And it doesn't matter. Not everybody can get an A on the test. That's not how it works. They compare everybody to each other. So you're always competing against the other students. So you get ranked from first to last in your class. And I don't know specifically what his grades are, but I'd bet the farm that they were excellent. If he wasn't number one in his class, I'd be shocked. And I'm sure he was at least a top three. I don't know. I'm sure he went to one of the Ivy League schools. I'm not sure which one he went to, but you could call Ted Cruz a lot of things, but he's not stupid, and neither is Trump stupid. But again, I've already established that, when you start calling people names, I think a lot of us are just going to completely discount your arguments. But for some reason, I clicked on your name and responded to it. So maybe I'm wrong about that. Matt M., the unconstitutional COVID tyranny needs to stop. I forgot I can't say that word, or else YouTube will later demonetize this video. I call it the mandate tyranny now. The mandate tyranny needs to stop. The Patriot Act took the Constitution from all of us under the guise of security. If you haven't seen the video of the new criminal case I'm defending of the man who shared a meme on Twitter and ended up getting charged as a terrorist under our terrorist statute here in West Virginia, I was talking to a legislator about it today, that, what, do we need a terrorist statute here in West Virginia or in any of these other states that we passed in response to 9/11? Have we, in the several decades since 9/11, have we prosecuted any terrorists under those statutes, or have we just prosecuted people like this who had, was not a terrorist, just shared a meme about our governor? I would suspect the latter. I don't know that there's any jihadis that were prosecuted here in West Virginia. Why not downsize everything, downsize taxes, but let's downsize the criminal laws out there. We don't need 5,000 criminal laws where you can't even go lobster fishing with a permit and not commit federal felonies in 2020. And you have several thousand more criminal statutes in any particular state that you're in at any time. So why not downsize? So we don't necessarily need our politicians to be proactively doing anything. They could do nothing, or they could start cutting out unnecessary laws that we already have, such as the terrorism law, and which went right along with the Patriot Act. Let's see. Ted Cruz is an idiot. Seriously, I really want you to investigate, what are my policy differences with Ted Cruz? I know he's an idiot, but why is he an idiot? Why is he an idiot? And, we've lost the art of or the practice of critical thinking in this country. And a lot of people like Terry and like Jim, they, instead of critical thinking, which they claim to do, what do they promote? It's nothing but tribalism. It's grouping people based on their country of origin or the color of their skin. If you're a certain color, then you must vote this way, you must feel this way. And it's all about collectivism instead of individualism. All right. Violated citizen. None of us have any God-given rights because we're governed by corrupt and tyrannical government, politicians, and organizations. I take it you're from the UK by your spelling and by the flag on your next to your name there. So yeah, you guys have it worse than we do now. But yeah, I mean, you guys were the first corrupt and tyrannical government that we lived under, and we fought a whole war under over restrictions that were way, way less restrictive than the ones that we're currently allowing to live under. But thanks for watching, anyways. And I need to look into more into what they're going through over there. I know that there's been a lot of big, huge protests in the UK and other places in Europe in response to some of the COVID tyranny, bigger protests than we've had over here. All right, Matt, what's the actual head count of legal voters? How many votes were recorded? How many, and were the spoiled votes, and how many states does it affect? Well, I really only went over Pennsylvania and Georgia. I believe in Georgia it was 200,000. And well, let me look it up. Yeah, I think it was like 200,000 in Georgia. And I'm not sure what it was in Pennsylvania just offhand. I don't see it anywhere easy, but again, go to the website and you can actually read the specific allegations that were in the lawsuit. All right, so Dreamland, it's all about the contracts we voluntarily sign. Non-assumptive forced contracts or involuntary servitude. No idea what you're talking about. But I'm not saying you're wrong. Let's see. Richard Long. Yeah, you're probably talking about the guy from England. Yeah, that's true. They gave up all their rights, including the right to have a gun. They can't even have like a kitchen knife now. And, we'll see if we're able to keep that right or not. Because without the Second Amendment, none of the other rights are even relevant. Just my 2 cents. Thanks for watching. Tabby's daddy. I'm self-governing. Oh no, you're not. And let's see. I saw another thing that I had saved. And this is going more towards the COVID tyranny. But I pulled this from somewhere. There was a chart. Here it is, showing the coercive methods that they use to get people to comply under communism, and comparing that with what they've been doing for COVID-19. And where did I get this? I'm not sure where I got this, but it has to do with the Biderman report from the communist brainwashing. But just take a look at this. Isolation. Okay, deprives the individual of social support and his ability to resist, makes him dependent upon the captor, develops an intense concern with self. And look at COVID-19, isolation, social distancing, isolation from loved ones, massive job loss, solitary confinement, quarantines, monopolization of perception. And that's what we have here in COVID-19, restriction of movement, creation of monotony, boredom, preventing gatherings, meetings, concerts, sports, dominating the media 24/7, censoring information, induced debility and exhaustion. And that's really you check all the boxes here. Threats, cultivates anxiety and despair, gives demands and consequences for noncompliance. And what do we have here in COVID-19? Threats. And our governor here in West Virginia has threatened us, threatened to close businesses, threatened to fine people, threatened to arrest people for not enforcing the mandates against others. And here we have occasional indulgences. So you have, the communists have to provide some motivation for compliance. And we have these in COVID-19 as well. We have some limited reopenings. Some stores, some services, some restaurants can open at smaller capacities. Demonstrate omnipotence. So they have to demonstrate the futility of resistance and show you who's in charge. And isn't that what we've seen here? Demonstrate omnipotence in COVID-19, shutting down entire economies in just days, creating money out of nowhere, forced dependency. That's exactly what our Senator Joe Manchin is doing right now, is saying, look, we need to just provide more money to people so they can stay at home and just give them the money to do so. And when has that ever been the answer? In fact, the answer is exactly the opposite. It's never the answer to just let the government, feed people and the people just stay at home and just try to survive, but not thrive. And that's not going to work for a number of reasons. But the best example I've seen for that is McDowell County, West Virginia. If you're not familiar, that's the very southern tip of West Virginia, and that was a big booming coal area in the first half of the 20th century. And right around the early 1960s, the coal jobs there completely dried up, and went from, it had like over 100,000 people, I believe, in population in the entire county in the 30s and 40s when coal was booming. And then the coal dried up and the companies left, the jobs left. And so John Kennedy came in there when he was first running for president, and he toured McDowell County, and that's where they started the first food stamp program, I believe, in the country. That's where they started food stamps. And so fast forward from that time to 60 years later, where is McDowell County now, where the government has said, don't worry about following opportunities and moving elsewhere or trying to thrive at all or trying to better yourself or stay self-sufficient. Just stay right where you're at, and we government will provide for you. We'll feed you and provide you with other benefits. So fast forward 60 years later, the population is now down to what's like 11,000 or something approximately. And they have like 8,000 plus abandoned homes and businesses that need to be torn down, that are unoccupied. And they look like something you'd see in a third world country somewhere. And it has the worst economy out of any county in the entire United States, and really the worst health. That men have a life expectancy now in that county of little over 60 years old. That's the worst life expectancy out of any county in the United States. And why? That it wasn't like that before. It's because government absolutely destroyed the place by saving people, and they created this dependency on government, and it just absolutely doesn't work. It's just like socialism. Maybe it sounds great, but it doesn't work in the real world. It's never worked in practice. It will never work. The right thing to do, though it may not sound as good, was to let the people move and follow the market and find new jobs somewhere else. But that's not what government did. So, yeah, they hate it when I criticize the county down there. But I tried a case earlier this year when this coronavirus stuff first happened, and I saw it for myself firsthand, and it's just sad. And really good people there, but the community, the economy was just absolutely destroyed because of government dependency. And so I think Senator Manchin just wanting to make everybody stay home and the government will feed you and provide for you, that's going to turn the entire state. And if we do it as a nation, the entire nation, into a McDowell County, where once you start just feeding people, and I mean, you're going to have a certain segment of the population that they're going to have a hard time getting out of that because their businesses closed down, their jobs that they did have prior to the lockdown didn't come back. So I don't think we should ever go to that. I don't think, there are, of course, exceptions for anything, but what did they first tell us? We just need to flatten the curve. We just need to go 14 days. Did anybody really think that was true? I think the same people that thought that was true are the same people that, if you go and watch our governor's daily free newscasts, free campaign events, you'll see the same people, commenting, "Oh, thank you so much for keeping us safe, and you're doing such a great job." It's probably the same people that believe that it was just going to be 14 days. The fact is that, to the government, 14 days means, indefinitely. It's been 9-10 months now. And I think I heard the other day the governor's talking about, he's having to distribute this vaccine and who gets what. And, there are certain groups of people he's not going to be able to give them the vaccine until into June. And it's like, wait a minute. Well, the legislature comes into session on February 1st of 2021. So what if they, what if they take back over the government? What if they, by a majority vote, stop the state of emergency rule that you've been engaging in for the past 10 months? I mean, they could close his candy shop at any time as soon as they get into office. But he's obviously assuming that that's not going to happen. Say no because healthcare personnel will still be working and other essential workers. Close down might slow it, but won't stop it. I don't even think we get to that, because governors should not be allowed to decide who is essential and non-essential. I don't think the legislature should be able to decide that, but have the legislature go decide that any of us are non-essential, and then talk to me, and then we can do a constitutional analysis about whether the government can do that. It can't be disputed that a governor in West Virginia, especially, cannot decide who is essential, who is non-essential, and close you down. That's a violation of the 14th Amendment due process clause, in my opinion, of course. That's right, Matt. We're all essential. Rules for thee, not for me. I've told this story a bunch of times, but during the height of the lockdown, really the height of the hysteria, we saw the closest advisors of the governor walking around in the Capitol when we were supposed to have masks on without a mask. And I've taken a video of the governor. I personally observed him without a mask and not socially distanced from a waitress. Other people have taken photographs of him. There was one at Marshall University at a football game, standing right next to an elderly man with no mask on. And that's absolutely the way it always is the rules are for the peasants. They're not for him. Do you think if you went to his resort that you'd see people with masks on all over the place? The people he's flown down there from New York and New Jersey, or flown up from Florida or over from California to play golf. Do you think that they're all walking around with masks on? I've heard otherwise. Big box stores are okay, but no small businesses. Squint Fox, Wisconsin actually exempted government from masks. So this is going to be interesting. A client of mine who's a legislator is going to be one of the first legislators to actually engage in legislative activity here very soon. And the question is there, what happens if he doesn't want to wear a mask during this legislative activity? Well, he's a part of the legislature. He hasn't voted on it, and he's part of the group that gets to create laws. Can the governor force him under the threat of arrest to wear a mask in the legislative, in the Capitol building, in the legislature? We'll see. I think these tyrannical orders from the governors are only going to get reviewed by courts if some brave people take stands. Now, Jay, the big box stores are okay, but no small business. That's exactly right. That's the insanity of it, is that you can have 500 people in a Walmart, but you can't have one person at a time or two people at a time, including a hairstylist and a small mom and pop hair salon. So Walmart, with the 500 people walking around, and we've all seen the people of Walmart anyways without a mask, you have them going in there and buying hair products, the same hair products that the hairstylist sells. But the government the governor has sanctioned Walmart to sell that item. And it has ordered the closure of the hairstylist and not allowed her or him to sell the very same product. And what is that but a violation of equal protection under the 14th Amendment? It absolutely is a violation of equal protection, among other things. But that's exactly what we're going through right now. But hopefully, and I said from the very beginning that the people are not going to put up with another lockdown, at least in West Virginia. And he's going more towards it every day, but I don't think people are going to comply. Now, for the most part, they seem to be complying with the mask mandate. I see people wearing masks absolutely everywhere at this point. And what's happening with the numbers? They're still going up and up and up and up. With the mask mandate, the numbers started to really go out of control. So it's not a conspiracy theory, and it's not disbelieving science. Based on what I've seen, the people with masks are touching their face constantly, and they're using dirty masks. You see masks all over the parking lot. I mean, it's disgusting, really. It's disgusting. It's not like you're in a hospital setting. I'm sure masks are worn for a reason in certain contexts, and they can be effective. But to make everybody in every situation, in every place, wear a mask is going to have a whole hell of a lot of unintended consequences, because there's going to be people that are using the mask improperly, or have improper masks or dirty masks, and they're going to be touching their face way more than they otherwise would have. And there's going to be other unintended consequences. And you don't have to be a scientist or a doctor to realize that. I mean, what are the social implications of going in just regardless of the economic shutdowns and the decrease in economic activity, what are the social implications of, husband and wife that are elderly, that have been kept away from each other, or have been kept in a mask, or going into a store where nobody will even look at each other and you can't understand each other. What about the people that, I think I had somebody on here before comment that they're hard of hearing, and when someone's wearing a mask, they can't read their lips? I mean, how is that going to negatively affect their lives when they can't understand what people are saying at all? And no one cares. I mean, you can tell them, look, I'm hard of hearing. I need to be able to see what you're saying. They don't care. Or somebody who has asthma, or the guy I talked to who was a military veteran who'd been shot twice in the lungs, and it actually hurt him to wear a mask. Does anybody care? Do the Karens care? No, they don't care. In fact, they tend to be the most vicious and uncaring people, that you'll talk to. And they don't care whether you're sick. They don't care whether the masks work. You're going to wear them and you're going to comply. Bootlicker, say hi to James Freeman. Hey, James. Are you James Bootlicker? Well, if James visited, I appreciate it. Hope everything's going well for you. If you haven't watched James Freeman's YouTube channel, you got to check it out. It's really hilarious. A lot of his videos, and he's kind of one of these First Amendment auditors, and he's got a couple of these videos. When we start asking, when you ask cops the stupid questions they ask us, it's hilarious. You'll see the first one that comes up. It's got like a ton of views. And you can contrast that with another video he has of a cop he asked the same questions of, and who responded. He was just a great sport about it. And it's some of the hilarious videos. And I've enjoyed watching a lot of these First Amendment videos, especially now that I'm working on a lot of this First Amendment stuff myself, especially with this terrorist meme case that I'm working on right now. So I've been doing a lot of First Amendment research, and case law is really what defines and interprets what a lot of these constitutional rights mean. And without people actually getting in these encounters and taking these court cases up, you don't get the case law. Another really good it's getting late, so I'm almost done here, but there's one YouTube video that I really recommend, and I don't have a link to it, but you can Google it or just search on YouTube. It's a conversation between Antonin Scalia and Justice, I believe it was Justice Stevens. And there's a couple of Scalia's conversations, but it perfectly showed an intelligent, no name calling conversation between two diametrically opposed constitutional lifelong scholars. One that was an originalist, Scalia, that believed that he could decide and should decide issues by figuring out what the intention was of the founding fathers and the drafters of the amendments, and trying to apply that to the situation that's before the court, the modern day. And then you have the Justice Stevens or the Justice Ginsburg, who sees the Constitution as a living, breathing document, that we should apply the present day morals and the change in public opinion on certain issues to constitutional law, which Scalia was opposed to. And it was a really, really good conversation, and they hit on a lot of topics. And I watched really the whole thing from beginning to end. But at some point, I'll post a link to it, but you can find it. It's all over YouTube. It was posted by a law school, I think. And that was that was such time well spent with a lot of the garbage that you can watch. Really a conversation. And yeah, like you said, they used to call it debate, and it was because they sparred with each other, but it was just such intelligent conversation, and we've lost that. We're all just down to orange man bad, or calling people conspiracy theorists or stupid, like we've had several times in this live chat. So might pay attention to that. So thanks for following along. That's my take on whether or not there's a path to victory for Trump, and I believe that there is. I believe that there is a path to victory, but no one knows because this hasn't happened before. It might come down to the United States Supreme Court. Karen, thanks. He went to Princeton and then went to Harvard Law School, graduating magna cum laude. So, Jim, that means that, or was it Terry? That means that he did good at Harvard Law School. But we all know that Harvard Law School is just, that you could be stupid and graduate top of your class at Harvard Law School, because if you don't agree with Terry politically, you're stupid. You're like Trump. You're orange man bad and stupid. And on the debates, Jay, I was reading an article also about Stephen Douglas, and he was a really interesting character. And of course, if you know about Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 election, another really crazy election year, and kicked off a civil war. Stephen Douglas was an interesting guy. He really had an interesting background, but back then debate was so important, and they life was hard, especially out in the frontier areas, and politics was thought as a fun pastime to debate politics, and it was a welcome distraction to the everyday drudgery and difficult life that people had. And Stephen Douglas was one of those people that, I mean, he and Lincoln had these debates, and they were orators, and they were both lawyers. And that's a really interesting guy to study. So I recommend looking up Stephen Douglas, and I'd like to do some videos on that, some history videos as well to get into some of those things. One last comment. Thanks, Terry. You're back. Ted Cruz is still an idiot, and Trump is Russian collaborator. Don't say I censored your speech, Terry. I put a lot of what you had to say up there. And one last thing from you. I hate Trump as much as I hate Biden. Well, there you go. Don't hate so much, Terry. Life is short, and you should really try to enjoy it. But thanks for watching. And that's again my take on what's going on. I think it's all about Georgia and Pennsylvania. And as much as I want to get past this election and move on to other things, we have to stay the course. And it's never a bad thing to make sure that votes that were counted on behalf of dead people, or people that voted multiple states, or people who weren't allowed by law to vote, or juvenile or convicted felons or whatever, according to state law, that can never be a bad thing to clean up those vote tallies. And it can never be a bad thing for any campaign to be able to challenge in court the legitimacy of an election or to contest an election. That's never a bad thing. It's been done in the past. That's what's happening now. Stay the course. Let's wait and see what the courts do, and not what the news media tells you to do. So thanks for watching. And probably next Monday at 6:30 p.m. and do another live video. In the meantime, I'll try to put up some other videos on the YouTube channel as I can find time to do. And I have a lot to say about the upcoming litigation that's happening with the governor and the mandates here in West Virginia. So please stay tuned. Check out civilrightslawyer.com. Sign up for the free emails. Then there's no spam when we post something new. And also make sure that you subscribe if you're on YouTube, and click the little bell button so that you get notified when we do have live videos. Sometimes there's heads up, and sometimes there's not, because I do have a day job. But thanks for watching, and I enjoyed it. Thanks for the lively debate, and I'll see you next time.